I'm Steve Woodruff. I'm Deputy Director of Western Progress here in our Northern Region office in Missoula. I'd like to welcome you to my hometown. We have a lot of visitors that come through here, and many of them remark about the wide open spaces we have here and the wild country that surrounds Missoula. And indeed, we have a lot of that. But I often tell, especially my family from back east who come out to Montana, I also point out that we're in one of the most urbanized parts of the country as well. Most Montanans live in cities. They don't live in cabins out in the woods. And with all that wild country out there, we also have some of the most developed country. These hillsides, as you look out here, look like they're covered with forest, but if you could have x-ray vision and see through some of those trees, we'd also see a lot of roads. There are, I don't know, I use the benchmark, the interstate highway system. It's something like 79,000 miles of interstates in this country. It's a marvel of public works and engineering. But in the national forests alone, we have something like 500,000 miles of roads. That's a lot of roads to maintain, a lot of roads that we built. We had a lot of jobs building those roads. These roads are, some of these roads are deteriorating and are actually, they're not benign, they're doing some harm. And that's what this next panel is about. We're looking at road restoration, not just simply for the sake of repairing or removing these roads, but as a component of watershed restoration. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists, and we have up here, Marnie Criley, who's the restoration specialist for Wildland CPR. Next to her is Mark Agee. He's a heavy equipment operator from Idaho. Ira Jones is the watershed director for the Nez Perce tribe. And next to him is Rebecca Lloyd, who is a resource specialist who has worked closely with Ira. Let me start off with Marnie. Again, she's the restoration coordinator for Wildland CPR. She'll tell you a little bit about her organization. As we started looking at this panel, everyone told us, well, you've got to start talking with Marnie. Everything begins with Marnie on this subject. She does know a lot. She's an excellent resource on this. So please welcome her to the podium.
Thanks, Steve. That's a lot of pressure. So I do want to just talk for a minute about the organization I work for, since some of you may have never heard of Wildland CPR. We had been around since 1994, and we started off as a clearinghouse of information about the ecological impacts of roads. A lot of folks out there were working on road-related impacts on their national forests, and we do primarily work on national forest lands. And there was no centralized location for information about roads. Since that time, we have really become a lot more proactive on issues. We now work a lot on promoting road restoration, road removal as a key component of forest restoration work. We also work a lot on motorized recreation issues. They're kind of intertwined issues, which is how we came to work on off-road vehicle work. So trying to sort of regulate motorized recreation use of our public lands so that a lot of these road systems don't get even more dispersed throughout the landscape. So as Steve mentioned, there's a lot of roads on our national forests. The Forest Service is one of the largest road management agencies in the world. No one knows exactly how many are out there, but probably somewhere between 400 and 500,000 miles. And these can cause a lot of ecological damage and impacts, especially when they're not maintained or built properly in the first place. And the Forest Service doesn't have the budgets right now, certainly to take care of nearly 500,000 miles of roads. So I want to just briefly sort of talk about where road restoration work got started. And throughout my talk, I'm going to kind of jump around to some restoration economy policy initiatives. So hopefully you guys can kind of keep up with some of the different components I'm talking about, and they won't all be specifically about road restoration work, but I want to start there since Ira, Becca, and Mark are really going to give us a good look at road decommissioning. So this work really got started in the 1980s at Redwood National Park and the creation of Redwood National Park in Northern California, where they had a lot of road-related erosion issues, landslides that were negatively impacting their fisheries. And since that time, the restoration work in Humboldt County, which is where Redwood National Park is located, those initial efforts really have created a restoration economy in Humboldt County. And you can see numbers here to where restoration, you know, it's rivaling some of their other big industries, the fisheries industry and agriculture sectors. So I think Humboldt County is one very specific place that we can look to see the creation of a restoration economy. And it got started with a lot of this road and watershed restoration work. So before I get into some of these other components, you know, one thing I just want to mention is that I think we see westwide, certainly see here in Montana, that restoration tends to get done in a pretty piecemeal fashion. You'll see vegetative treatments in one place, stream work in another place, addressing roads in another place. And so, you know, what we are trying to promote is a more holistic approach to doing restoration work. I think ecologically and economically, it makes a lot more sense when you go into a landscape, into a watershed, to address a lot of these issues at once. So just kind of keep that in mind as I go through some of these other policy initiatives. And I'm going to start with a piece of legislation that's actually ongoing at the moment, national legislation. If we do not fix our roads, we will have to drink our roads after they slide into our streams. This is a quote from Representative Norm Dix from Washington State, as he sponsored House Resolution 2643, the Legacy Roads Remediation Initiative. And this has passed the House and is now in the Senate, and it would provide $65 million to upgrade culverts, do some road decommissioning work, and it would focus on this type of work that would improve fisheries and make urgent repairs to storm-damaged roads. So a lot of it would be geared towards the Pacific Northwest, but it would be for all national forests. And it's a pretty unique bit of money for the Forest Service. It would actually be the largest direct allocation that the Forest Service has ever received for watershed restoration through road decommissioning work. So it's a very positive step. We'll see, you know, how it moves through Congress. I think one important thing to recognize with it, though, is that it's one-time money. So this would be one pot of $65 million. And in a minute, I'll talk about what is needed to really restore all the roads out there that need to be restored. And when I do that, you'll see that $65 million will go a ways, but it won't take care of the entire problem. So what's really needed is some long-term funding for roads work. All right, so now I'm going to move on to a publication that Wildland CPR put together. We contracted actually with an economic development firm out of Arcata, California called Center for Environmental Economic Development to look at costs and benefits of a national road decommissioning program. And this came about back in 2001. The Forest Service came out with their roads policy. And in the roads policy, they addressed the fact that they had more roads than they could take care of or that were needed. And they talked about decommissioning around 186,000 miles of roads across the national forests. And when the Forest Service talks about decommissioning, it could be anything from putting up a berm or a gate to actually going in and doing full recontouring type work that Ira and Becca and Mark will talk about here in a minute. So we decided to take that number and see what kind of the costs and benefits of a program across the country that would decommission 186,000 miles of roads would look like in terms of jobs, other economic benefits, and what the costs might be. So I think this is the only slide of the numbers I have, but so in terms of jobs, what they found was that annually it would create over 3,000 jobs, and this is nationwide and economy-wide. So these would not be just the direct jobs of, Mark and Rebecca being out there on the ground doing the work, but it would also be, producing the heavy equipment, maintaining the heavy equipment, all these types of things that involve businesses and companies across the country. 33 jobs would be created for every $1 million spent, and as I said, there's a lot of supportive services that go along with road decommissioning work. Another key thing that came out of that report that to me is just as important as these numbers, and one thing to mention is, Cass was talking about sort of equipment-intensive type restoration work. Well, that's what road decommissioning is. And most of this work does tend to be quite local because, you can't afford to move an excavator very far. So these are providing jobs to rural communities and folks living out in the woods, which is a great benefit. But the other thing that came out of this study is the fact that, and we've talked about this a bit with preventative stuff, I know Walter had mentioned it, to wait until the roads blow out and then go in and address it afterwards costs way more than if we go in and deal with these roads now, before that happens. So it's not just an ecological necessity, it's also an economic necessity. We're going to save money by addressing these issues before they get too bad. All right, so as I said, I'm going to be kind of going through a lot of these documents, and a lot of these are available on the thumb drive that you were given, including this one. So this is the economic study, investing in communities, investing in the land. If you'd like a hard copy, they're on the table over there. And the next one I'm going to talk about is also available on the thumb drive, and it is a national set of restoration principles that the conservation community put out a few years ago. And the impetus for that was back in 2000, a few of us in the conservation community from groups all over the country started having conversations about restoration. It wasn't an issue that a lot of us had addressed very much. A few of us were starting to, and we were concerned, A, that we felt like maybe the Forest Service wasn't using the term the way that we would use the term, and also that we did not ourselves have a good idea of what we meant by restoration. So over the course of about 2 years, with quite a few meetings, we came up with a set of restoration principles, and it's called the Citizens' Call for Ecological Forest Restoration Principles and Criteria. And I think it was definitely kind of a milestone for the conservation community because we didn't just address the ecological component of restoration in these principles. We addressed the economic component and the communities and workforce component. And people like Kaz Mosley and some other folks really kind of helped us understand some of those aspects and figure out that we needed to include those, that to have good restoration work on the ground, you have to be thinking about all those components. So in the end, 120 different conservation groups signed off on these principles. We did get input from a lot of restoration practitioners, conservation biologists, community forestry folks. And from that process and that project, we actually created a National Forest Restoration Collaborative. And the group is still moving forward, trying to address some of these issues, and currently we're actually working on some national legislation from some of the efforts of these principles and some other efforts that community forestry groups have been working on, with the idea of trying to get more collaborative forest restoration, watershed restoration happening on the ground on our national forests. So that's kind of an ongoing effort. All right, so now I'm going to take us to Montana, which is where, while NCPR is based in Montana, we do also have a staff person in Washington State and Utah, but the majority of our staff is in Montana, and even though we're a national group, over the years, a lot of our work has been happening in Montana. And there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in this state with restoration right now, and I just wanted to highlight a few of those before I turn it over to our road decommissioning experts. So last summer, June of 2006, Governor Schweitzer held a restoration summit in Billings, Montana, and about 300 folks attended that summit from really all walks of the restoration realm. Practitioners, companies like Envirocon, who are doing a lot of the Milltown work. Labor was there, a lot of conservationists were there, agency people. And out of that forum, we came up with quite a list of policy-type recommendations, things that we felt needed to happen for Montana's restoration economy to really take off. And, you know, we created a document, and often documents end up just sitting on a table somewhere and nothing happens with them. Well, over the last year in Montana, things have been happening with the policy recommendations that came out of that forum. And I think, you know, the governor's office and other folks involved really had a lot to do with that, and we're very lucky here to have their support. So just a few of the recommendations were, you know, things that we probably all think about. Better agency coordination around restoration across the state, the need for more funding to do restoration work, and where's this funding going to come from? The idea of creating some type of restoration business association, trade association type idea, the need for more training, and training from, you know, that could come from the universities, our technical colleges, our labor unions, as well as NGOs. So currently, there is a job announcement out for Montana's new state restoration coordinator. It's going to be housed in our Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. So it's very exciting that we're finally going to have a restoration person for the state of Montana. Another thing that came out of that forum is what is still kind of a loose network, may be becoming more formalized in the near future, but it's called Restore Montana. And it represents sort of all those interests that were at the forum, trying to work together to help build Montana's restoration economy and help brand Montana's restoration economy. I mean, restoration is so many different things. It's taking out Milltown Dam, it's cleaning up mines, it's taking out roads, it's doing thinning. And there's a lot of people that, you know, just work on one of those or the other and don't often work together, don't even know each other. So I think, you know, we've got our work cut out for us to really create a restoration economy, but I think we've made some good initial steps. And the last thing that I want to mention, hot off the presses, a group of about 30 folks got together very end of January of this year to try to find common ground around restoration. And it included some of the environmental folks in western Montana who often appeal restoration projects, timber-related projects. It included Montana Logging Association. It included myself. It included the Forest Service, 2 forest supervisors, some outfitters and guides, a representative from the governor's office. There was a lot of folks at the table. And we decided that we could find a zone of agreement around restoration. So for the next 6 months, we put together a set of restoration principles, 13 restoration principles. And there are copies of this on the table. Because this is hot off the press, it didn't make it onto the thumb drive, but I have about 50 copies of this. So help yourself to one. The principles, the national principles that I worked on a few years ago, you know, we used those as well as ones from New Mexico, Arizona, and other places to help us put these together. But we never really implemented those on the ground in a substantive way. A lot of groups have used those. Our plan with these principles is to get some projects done soon. We're looking at the Lolo and Bitterroot National Forests here in western Montana to take these principles and see if we can't get some good comprehensive restoration projects at least underway, certainly within the year. So that's our goal, a lofty goal, but I think you know, there's a lot going on in Montana around this issue right now, as there is in a lot of the western states. So it's pretty exciting, and with that, I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you. Thank you, Marnie. Before Ira and Becca stand up here, I think it might be good to point out we've talked so far last night and today a lot about some of the roles of the federal government, some of the roles of the state government. I think it's good to remind ourselves there's another set of governments out there that are equal partners in this restoration effort. I'd like to bring up Rebecca Lloyd and Ira Jones, talk about the work they've done in partnership with the Forest Service as representatives of the Nez Perce tribe. Ira?
Thank you very much, Western Progress. This has been real interesting. Very pleased to be here, proud to be here actually. I am a native of Montana, grew up here on the Flathead Reservation, but I'm a Nez Perce Indian from Lapwai, Idaho, and all of the ceded territory that I'll talk about a little bit here in a minute. It was very interesting last night. I've never met the governor. It was exciting to hear your governor speak. How many of you from Montana here? Are you all proud of your governor? Oh, that's good to hear. I'm not supposed to make anything political, but that's really cool. It was really good to hear him talk. And it was good to hear him talk about 10,000 years of the Indian people, the native people that have been here. It was, you don't hear too many governors talk the way he talked. He has knowledge about the native people here in Montana. He didn't mention the Nez Perce. I was a little disappointed in that, but I guess it's my turn today, so I'll take care of that. But yeah, the 10,000 years, it just, and the mining, it's incredible, the economy that's coming in here due to the mining reclamation that's going to be happening here. We have some similar stuff in our ceded territory that we're going to be working on, but not that big. But overall, in the future, I think we will be bringing a lot of money to the basin, to the Columbia River Basin, the Clearwater and the Salmon Rivers. And which reminds me, how many of you are salmon fishermen, steelhead fishermen, cutthroat trout fishermen? It's really good to know, because we got a slide coming up that's really, really impressive how much economy salmon can bring to the Columbia River Basin and Missoula, Montana, because there's a lot of steelhead fishermen here from Missoula I see every Friday headed down. They're down there right now. There's 15 boats probably right out of Lewiston fishing for steelhead right now and on up the river. The governor last night reminded me of a story. I have a real good friend in the Forest Service. I think he was a good friend. Anyway, he invited me. He called me one day and he says, the miners here in north central Idaho are having a meeting tonight, and we'd like the tribe to be represented there. We'd like you to come sit in and listen to the problems they may have or the issues they may have with the Forest Service that may extend to the tribe at some point because of the 1855 treaty. And so I agreed to go to that, but he also told me I didn't need to talk. All I needed to do was listen and take notes. So I went to that. And there was probably three generations of miners that been mining in the South Fork of the Clearwater and the Salmon Rivers, and must have been 40 of them stuffed in a room about third of this size. And I went in there and sat down and sat and listened to them. They had a lot of concerns, a lot of issues with the Forest Service. And when it was just about over, I was getting kind of relaxed and ready to walk out and drive back to Lewiston, and this good friend of mine got up and he says, oh, by the way, the tribe is here. We'd like to hear from Ira what his view is on this mining stuff that you guys have been talking about today. Totally caught me off guard. Well, as you heard the governor talk about the 10,000 years, I was just stunned. I was shocked, and I didn't know if I could even talk. But finally, I had about a second to think, and I told him, I says, I respect your 5 generation of miners. I respect what you people are doing and what you love, like we all love certain things in our lives. And I said, but I need to put something into perspective here, because there is a concern going to come from the tribe when it comes to mining. And that is, you got to understand, when we're talking 10,000 years of native people, Nez Perce people in this area, we're looking at 550 generations of people. And today, a lot of people will even consider it, and we consider it, we're organic to this land. So when it comes to mining, it's going to be difficult. I ended it with that. I walked up to that good friend of mine and I says, I don't need enemies when I got friends like you, partner. So we're going to talk about other partners today. That was really interesting last night. I compliment the governor of Montana and all of his staff that was here. It's really great to see. This picture you're looking at here is the beginning of the headwaters of the Lochsaw River, and that's where Colt Kilt and where Crooked River pour into there, which is, about 12 miles, I think, from the state of Montana. This is a very significant area. The water's really pristine and it's real clean and it means a lot to all of us, but the one thing about it is you can't drink the waters anywhere in Idaho anymore because of the certain diseases, Giardia and things like that will make you very sick, but it's really unfortunate. It takes me back to Mission Creek in St. Ignatius, Montana, where I grew up. My grandmother, I remember when I was about 7 years old, we were getting sick because we used to drink the water. We used to swim in the creek. We used to drink the water out of there. And we started getting sick. So she figured out what it was, and she told us we got to quit drinking the water. We got to stay out of the water. And what she pointed out was the problem, and it was cattle. People had moved cattle in there. The riparian, she said all the willows and all the brush that used to be here is gone. There's no grasses. And she described it to me as the water temperature is going up, so these diseases are developing in the water, and it will kill you. So she says, go to the Mission Mountains as high as you can get, and you can still drink the cold, clean water in the missions. I've never forgotten that. I'm going to move forward here. I'm going to come back to what I was just talking about, but the Nez Perce tribe's area of influence is very, very impressive as far as I'm concerned, and all the people that work for us there at the Nez Perce tribe and Watershed division. As you can see, the big blue circle out there kind of represents the areas the Nez Perce people for years fished and hunted in and gathered. It goes into the Montana territories, into the Dakotas, and I asked for this disclaimer to be put in there with the arrows because really when you look at this, when it heads out into Montana and the Dakotas, it's buffalo country. And buffalo country extends far into Canada, clear to Oklahoma. And the Nez Perce people used to follow all of that country. And in fact, this year, the governor of Montana okayed and signed a letter from the Nez Perce tribe because we told the state we're coming to Montana, to Yellowstone, to hunt buffalo again. So the first time since probably the 1877 war, the Nez Perce are back hunting buffalo. And when we're talking about economy, I was wondering what one of those costs. 4 ounces of buffalo jerky. Maybe I could start a business here because I'm coming buffalo hunting here. 50 years, I titled this 50 Years of Restoration because, again, growing up on the Flathead Reservation, I knew very little about the Nez Perce Reservation. Lewiston, I'd hear names over the years as a little kid, but when I was about 7 years old, up on Packer Meadows, and this is kind of in the foreground of Packer Meadows, that's a camas plant that you will find up there at Packer. They're beautiful. They're a real beautiful plant. If you're ever up there in the full bloom, it looks like a lake at Packer Meadows, and I think it's about 200 acres of property there that you can look at. And when the wind's blowing, you can see the waves. It's really pretty neat. Well, it was right near here when I was about 7 years old. My grandmother told me, and she took me down with my mother, and we walked on this portion of the trail, the Nez Perce Trail. And the governor mentioned a couple other characters yesterday that now you hear about the Lewis and Clark Trail, but it's still the historic Nez Perce Buffalo bartering trail as I see it, and I'll always remember it that way. But we walked a short distance, and my grandmother told me, she says, and I'll never forget this, she says, someday you need to follow this trail home to your people. Well, a lot of years passed, and I never knew what that meant. I went to work for the Forest Service, spent 24 years with the Forest Service before I retired, but during that time, the last 12 years of my Forest Service career, I was the tribal government specialist for the region. So I got to work a lot of Indian country and deal with a lot of different programs trying to get opportunities for tribes as a government-to-government relationship. And so it was kind of fun and it was kind of exciting. But during this time, it was kind of interesting because back in about 1991, we dedicated the Nez Perce Trail, and we had all the Nez Perce people from Lapwai, from the Red Thunder group over in Nez-Pelum, that's the direct descendant of War Chief Joseph, and other tribes within the surrounding area. I was sitting there talking with Red Thunder, Joe Red Thunder, who was kind of the chief of the Nez-Pelum band, and he got to talking about that particular meadow. And it never occurred to me, but he said, you know, Ira, he says, in 1877 was the last time we camped here. This is in 1991. For the first time, we're all sitting here relaxed, and we're really enjoying this country that our ancestors enjoyed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so that kind of touched me. That same year, I was at Post Office Ridge giving a presentation to a bunch of Nez Perce kids. It was a cultural camp that they had up there on Saddle Mountain and right on the trail. Post Office Ridge is tributary to the Lochsaw. And I stood there talking with the kids and visiting with the kids, and then I kind of formally give them a presentation, and I talked the importance to them how they need to be involved in education, they need to get the college education, they need to learn the science, but the most important thing is at some point we got to blend science with culture. That's what we're lacking. So when you kids come home from school, you need to be talking to your elders, your grandmothers, because they're the ones that have the knowledge that can give you the information necessary to blend science and culture. I've never forgotten that for a lot of years, because I heard that blending science with culture at a conference in Portland, Oregon about 10 years before, and that always stuck with me. So I went around talking that, and I think it's really critical and it's really important. But while I was talking to these kids, there was this elder Nez Perce woman, and she pulled me aside afterwards and she said, so you're the Montana Nez Perce I've been hearing about. And I said, yeah, I guess so. You know, I never really thought about it. So you're the one that's been protecting our buffalo country for all these years, talking treaty rights and treaty right protection. And I said, all right, I'll take credit for it. and so it got real interesting. But going back to what the governor was saying, what my grandmother was saying at St. Ignatius, Montana, about the importance of clean water. As the governor stated, someday you're going to be drinking water out of the Clark Fork River. Wouldn't that be something? I hope we are. That would be really good to see. I hope in my lifetime. So keep up the good work here and get that done. So she started describing to me, and way off you could see Lolo Pass from Post Office Ridge. I don't know how many air miles that is, but she was probably 82 years old, and she could see better than me, and she was describing these clear cuts. And I could see them, and I was listening to her, and she started talking about how it's important for you to come home to your people because you have the knowledge now that you can help your people and start restoration, cleaning up this world that has been destroyed by past management practices. I couldn't believe her intelligence and her knowledge and how she spoke to me that day. But one of the things she described, which was a critical part of my life, was she says, you got to take it, you got to look at it as if you cut your fingers and you don't take care of them, they'll get infected. Those clear cuts are infected. They're bringing poison to the Lochsaw. She said it'll start moving up your veins eventually into the Lochsaw, all these tributaries to the Columbia, the Clearwater, the Columbia, and then eventually all that poison will hit your heart in your own body. But once it gets to the ocean, that is the heart of life. So she described the water as the blood of life. And if we don't protect it, we're all going to die. That's true, very true. And I kind of heard the governor saying that yesterday, so I really appreciated that. So in 1997, I went home, and listening to that woman, the way she described, she was actually looking at ridge tops, and she was saying you need to start working out here and over here, but I had no concept of all of what that really meant and what she was really thinking until I give it more thought. So out of that, we've developed with Rebecca and all of my key staff our vision. The Watershed Division is focused on protecting and restoring and enhancing watersheds and all treaty resources throughout the Nez Perce territory, as described in the Treaty of 1855. These activities are accomplished using a holistic approach which encompasses entire watersheds, ridgetop to ridgetop. For some reason, this ridgetop to ridgetop's really caught a lot of interest. but that comes from Feature Smiles, one of our elders. Emphasizing all cultural aspects, and the end result of our work will produce healthy, productive ecosystems for the increase in anadromous and resident fish populations. That's our vision. So from there, 1997, where do we start? As you look back at that first map that I had up there, the area of influence, there was a section that dropped down. I'm going to go back to that real quick because I want to show, forgot to mention this. Okay, that's the area of influence, and what you're going to see on the one I just showed is right here is the ceded territory that covers Oregon, into Oregon and Washington. And then this is the 1863 reservation that exists today. This is the 1855 boundary. This is known as the ICC boundary. The Indian Claims Commission and the tribe agreed to those boundaries, so they're a legal boundary, a legal document has been developed on that. So what you're looking at here is the ICC boundary. That's roughly 13.5 million acres. That takes in 3 states. I think 8 or 9 counties. So there is a lot of coordination efforts that's got to go on there, and we've been able to do some pretty good work even on private lands on the 1863 reservation. But more focused today, we're going to come closer to Montana and take a look at the Lochsaw Basin here that Rebecca is the program manager of. And she's going to get into the details of the road obliteration and all the culvert work that we're doing in there. Okay, so we come to talk about partners. Here's a list of partners that we've been working with. Pointing out the first 2 up there, Bonneville Power, of course, is the main funding agency for all of the projects that we have. They fund about 95% of our budget. And then there's the Idaho Conservation, or the Idaho Office of Species Conservation, Pacific Salmon NOAA dollars that we received a couple years ago, but that fund kind of dried up. But the 2 of them has been our primary money banks here over the last 10 years. Forest Service, of course, has contributed. I think the 5th, 6th one down there, and under 94, 148. That's how we've got a lot of the work done on Forest Service land, which is a partnership agreement that I've been using for about 25 years, working with Indian tribes and the Forest Service. So in the 10 years, we've had several other awards, but we always like to highlight these here. This is the Rise to the Future Award, Chief of the Forest Service. Me and my staff went back to D.C. and had a pretty good time. First time some of these young Lapway boys ever seen D.C., and they'll never forget it. And then in 2004, AFS Award for Riparian Management in Meadow Creek. Heidi McRoberts, one of my program managers, received that one. And we flew her out to Salt Lake, I think, where she picked that one up. 2006, of course, we just received here last year the Honor Award for cooperative programs in Watershed. So here's kind of what we're looking at as far as this is only spelling out the Watershed Division of the Nez Perce Tribes Fisheries Program. We have in total 21 FTEs and 15 seasonals. We're hoping to increase that here in the near future. It kind of looks like funding will be available to do that. So this kind of invests into our regional economy. As you can see, we buy all of our local supplies, plants, erosion control as much as we can locally. We support the U.S. Forest Service for equipment and supplies, labor contracts. We fund a lot of the Forest Service activities in terms of actual contractors that they hire, and part of their contribution to the program is the administrative work of the contracts. And of course, we have Mark here today who's going to be talking about construction and heavy equipment. He's one of our key contractors doing a lot of the track hole work on the road obliteration. And there shows you a cost share that we've had with the Forest Service since 1996 to 2006. 12 million and 5 million is the Forest Service contribution. That's hard cash, and that there is what got us the honor award, Regional Foresters Honor Award here last year. And then just here in 2007, Nez Perce Tribe, 2 million, National Forest, $500,000. That's Packer Meadows. Earlier you saw the slide of the one flower, so now I'm going to turn this over to Rebecca Lloyd.
Thanks, Ira. So we thought we would focus in on the Loxaw. Ira skipped a slide. I'll go back to it. We came across this study, the potential economic benefit from restored salmon and steelhead fisheries, and there's been a lot of talk about sustainable restoration programs, but there's also a sustainable focus at the end of restoration, and at least where we work, which is an anadromous fisheries, salmon and steelhead, and I'm sure this translates to the fishing industry in Montana as well. This is recreational fishing. Estimates based on a 2001 record anadromous fishing year, salmon and steelhead, estimates are at $550 million to the state of Idaho. And to the small towns along the Clearwater, in just the direct cost, they brought in $30 million. That's staggering. These towns are, under 2,000 people, and indirect cost estimated that's tripled. And along the Salmon River, even higher estimates. So that's something to think about when we're talking about restoration economy. Is also, what restoration can do for you. And like Ira said, so I've worked on the Loxaw since 1997. I started with the Clearwater National Forest as a hydrologic technician, and when I finished my graduate school part 1 with a master's, Ira hired me on as a project manager and gave me the chance to move up to the Loxaw and develop our restoration programs there. So like Ira said, the outer boundary here is the ICC boundary, so that's the area where the tribe maintains their legal treaty rights. The highlighted in yellow, those are the upper Loxaw projects that we're going to talk about today. The shaded areas are the other locations where we have similar restoration projects on the ground. And the amount of work we do kind of varies by how long we've been on the ground. And this is a 10-year project on the upper Loxaw, so it's one of our most productive projects. And this is about 400,000 acres for the whole Loxaw, so just under that. 80% of it's federally managed. There's private timber in holdings. It used to be Palm Creek Timber Company. They sold their land last year. They own about 12% of land. We're currently in negotiations to do a federal land exchange with that land. There's 19 miles of mainstream habitat and over 500 miles of spiny and marine habitat. And also some other notes that kind of, listening to everyone speak earlier, it's a spruce fir forest. It's a little different than some of the forests we're really emphasizing. You guys are talking about how hard it is to sell ideas about fire. It's even harder when you work in a forest that's maintained by catastrophic fire. That's very hard. And all of this comes into play with how we do our restoration. The biggest management impact on the Loxaw. What? Oh, sorry. The biggest management impact on the Loxaw are really high road densities. These roads were built starting in the 1950s and then continued all the way through the 80s. So the first slide is an aerial view. That's a drainage called the Badger Creek Drainage, where we have a road basically every 60 vertical feet on the hillside. Most of the drainages, these roads were not maintained as current open drivable roads. Marnie talked about this, the backlog maintenance in the Forest Service. All of them have failing drainage structures. So think of 60 miles of road in a drainage, and each road that crosses a tributary is actually functioning as a mini dam. So that's the kind of situation, that's sort of the easy to look at landscape impacts. You got fragmentation, you've got interruptions of hydrologic cycles. Well, that all eventually has an impact on the fisheries and stream values. So it's kind of we had a graphic link between aquatic and terrestrial systems in the 95-96 flood event that happened on the Clearwater. We had 2 subsequent rain on snow events. Over 300% of the average annual precipitation fell in 2 storms. The result was a massive landslide event. And after the end of the landslides, did an analysis. Well, almost 60% of the landslides started from these abandoned, overgrown logging roads with failing drainage structures. And that happened to be just about the same time that Ira Jones was starting the Watershed Division. We had this catastrophic event that happened on the Clearwater. We have Ira starting the Watershed Division, and the two kind of things worked together. We had this perfect opportunity to partner with the Forest Service, and that's really what started our program. It really did start as a road restoration program, and our goals for road restoration are really driven by recovery after the flood and understanding the impact that overgrown roads can have. So we're looking at reducing road-associated mass failure, erosion sedimentation, slope hydrology, and then putting the land back into production, ultimately to protect fisheries habitat. So some of our accomplishments, we've opened up over 40 miles of tributary habitat just by removing failing log crossings, and over 300 miles of road removed. This is just on the Lochsaw, so this is just my piece of our tribe's program. This is what it looks like on the ground. This is a road that was overgrown, and we cleared it for access just before decommissioning. And this is just after decommissioning. Mark Agee did this road, by the way. And then this is 3 years later. And we've had pretty good native revegetation success on that road. Ira started talking about our vision, and we were really road-driven in the beginning because that is the major impact on the Lochsaw. But we really have started in the last 4 or 5 years to try to expand, to do a more integrated restoration. A lot of those problems are still driven by the impact of roads because our road densities are so high, but we've started to replace barrier culverts and look at the road system we're going to keep. What are some engineering fixes we can do? And also the noxious weed program is beginning to grow because we're just really starting to appreciate the impacts of any kind of disturbance, including restoration for the introduction of noxious weeds, as well as monitoring all of those. I'm going to quickly show you some slides. We're kind of running out of time, and I'm hungry too. I'm just going to show you some of our before and after pictures. This is a before culvert. And this is after our goal is stream simulation. We want a natural stream channel design with natural substrate colonized with no grade breaks in the culvert. So we're passing not just our keystone aquatic species, but all aquatic species. So far we've done 20 culverts and we've opened up over 50 miles of spawning and rearing habitat, and it's important to note that some of that was completely blocked from anadromous fish for 50 years, and all of a sudden we're seeing recolonization by steelhead. Pretty exciting. Here's the recontoured road, and the plant that's on it is knapweed. So in some of our really heavily disturbed areas, we can treat the road problem, but we're not really getting to a functioning ecosystem again. And in this area, we already had a lot of knapweed, but we just opened up another avenue for disturbance. And all of our revegetation was for naught. Everything grew back to knapweed. And so we're really starting to try to figure out how we can integrate our weed treatment with our other restoration. And we started with a goat grazing pilot treatment in that area. Those are along the same roads, and so far we think that's, for really heavily infested areas, maybe one of our best treatment tools. Our future plans. A year and a half ago, I secured funding for the next 3 years through 2009 for our Upper Lochsaw programs from BPA, and we're hoping to continue to match that with other sources of funding to bring in our restoration on the private lands piece. 40,000 acres acquired to put into federally protected status has been my dream for the Lochsaw since I got here. So it's enormously gratifying to see that may actually happen, that we'll have unified protected ownership of the Lochsaw and not subdivisions. Once I secured the funding, it was a time for us to step back and look at our program. And after 10 years, we have some really good monitoring data and some ideas about why one site worked really well and why another site didn't work very well. But what we had trouble was finding the time and the funding to look at those kinds of science questions behind restoration. So I've just started to go to graduate school. I'm at the University of Arizona in a doctorate program in eco-hydrology. I'll be doing my research here, and trying to get at some of the questions that we talked about today. What is landscape scale restoration? How much of a scale do you need to design a project to have a meaningful impact? You know, the Tribes program is one of the largest I've ever seen, to be able to be spread out over, in just my project area, 400,000 acres. And then try to go back and look at our data so that you're really looking not just on how to bring back salmon, but how to restore ecosystem function. And so we're pretty excited about being able to bring that final piece into our restoration program. And I think Ira wanted to wrap up with one more thought.
You can go ahead and read it.
Okay, this is from Levi Holt. He's a tribal elder, and I think it really captures a perspective about restoration, that what it really does mean, that it's not just restoring the earth. The tribes have always treated water as medicine because it nourishes the life of the earth, flushing poisons out of human, other creatures, and the land. We know that to be productive, water must be kept clean. When water is kept cold and clean, it takes care of the salmon. And that's really what we're about. It's not just thinking in terms of one piece of it, but we're all connected to this landscape, and I think it's captured really well. So I'm going to turn it over to
You know, as we're talking about the restoration economy and jobs, I think it's important to remember we're talking about people and families and communities. And so here's one of those people who can talk about his family, his community, and his migration into the restoration economy, Mark Agee.
Maybe I can talk about this. I want to thank Sarah and Western Progress for inviting me here today. I want to apologize before I ever get started. I haven't spoken publicly since my last 4-H demonstration in 1977. So try to bear with me. I've been a lifelong resident of the Clearwater Valley over here on the other side of Lolo Pass. I'm only 4 generations. Ira's got me whipped out by a long ways. But my family, we run a cattle ranch in the valley, and the public lands have always played a big part in my growing up and our family. We ran cattle on the Forest Service allotment, and so the public land has always been a big part of who I am. My brother, he took over the ranch after he got out of school, and so that left me to go to college. And so I tried that for a couple of years, and that just wasn't my cup of tea. I couldn't drink as much beer as they brewed, so I come home and went to work. I started out in doing some logging and ended up in the lumber industry working in a sawmill. Done that for about 13 years. Always was either on a lift truck or a loader or something. I've always ran equipment. I enjoyed it. I'd done it on the farm, so it always was something I liked to do. And after 13 years, I knew that I didn't want to stay in the sawmills forever, so with the support of my wife and family, I started Mark Agee Excavation. And that was in 1995. And the first year, my brother-in-law, he was in the business, and so he got me on doing road maintenance, reconstruction jobs, some timber sale work, stuff like that. And I was getting by, but it was a struggle. And then the best thing that ever happened to Mark Agee Excavation was the flood of '96. I mean, there was work everywhere. I spent the entire winter working on county roads. Come spring, I got on the call when needed list with the Forest Service and went to Squaw Creek for the Forest Service. That drainage had just been pretty much annihilated by the floods. So I spent the summer there, and that was the first time I'd ever saw road obliteration in progress. They had one machine in that drainage, and I remember every morning this big 3/4 ton blue Dodge pickup would come creeping up the road beside me, and there was this little gal that looked like she was about 12 years old with a ball cap screwed on her head, peeking over the top of the steering wheel. It was Rebecca Lloyd. She was the inspector on that job, so that was the first time I saw it. I wasn't actually involved, but I kind of kept track of what was going on, and then in about September, we got everything done as far as reconstructing the roads and stuff in that drainage. So I made some phone calls, talked to Dean Roach, an engineer for the Forest Service on the Clearwater, to see if there was any more work available. And he said, I don't have anything, but you might call Annie Connor. She's in Orfino. She's the head of the road obliteration. So I did that, and as luck would have it, she just happened to have a project just getting ready to start, and it was right on my way leaving Powell, about 20 miles from my home. So that was my first time of doing that, and I've been doing it ever since. It's fabulous work, and it's good work. It's worthwhile work. I've spent the majority of my time in the Powell district with Rebecca and other folks. I think we've made a big, improvement to the landscape there. There's still a lot left to do, though. A few of the things that I guess on my side of the page with this is the contracting. The Clearwater, for years they had the call when needed contract. Every spring you filled out what equipment you had, how much per hour you wanted for your equipment, move in, move out rates, things like that. And then as they needed you, they would call and you would go to work. Well, they tell me the regional office decided that wasn't a good way to do things. That these hourly contracts weren't as good as, say, a fixed price contract. But the Clearwater, Annie, and I know Rebecca and everybody really bucked that, and we kept the hourly contract. It went from call when needed to a watershed restoration contract, and it was still an hourly rate. And we were able to take time and do things right, and it really worked well. But then this year, budgets and different things in the Clearwater, I talked to Annie in the spring, and she said, boy, it just doesn't look like we're going to have much on the Clearwater. You better be looking, for something else. So I went to the Nez Perce National Forest, and they have the fixed price contract. And I'd always steered clear of them. I didn't agree with it, but I thought I need the job, so I bid it, and I bid 2 different jobs, and I got one of them. So in fact, I just finished it Monday. It was good work. I had, great people I worked with. But I think there's real problems with that type of contract. I was out one day, I guess, to me, there's road obliteration and there's watershed restoration. And I like watershed restoration. I mean, you can go in and tear out roads, but if you don't, especially in areas like Powell and where I was in Red River, there's so much water that if you don't address it now, it's not going to get addressed because there's no access. The road's gone. I mean, there's nothing left. And if you don't take the time to really address those things, using the vegetation and materials, rock, root wads and stuff to help stabilize these streams, I really think you're not doing a fair job to the land. And that fixed price contract that I worked did not address those issues. I was really kind of torn when I took the contract because I thought I want to do things right, but like Cassandra said, you know, you have that competition thing, you know, you have to screw your price right down on a fixed price contract to be awarded. And so I thought, man, am I going to have to, you know, do I take the time to address the water issues? Well, I got into the contract and I was doing well at it. And so I happened to have one of my favorite inspectors in the world, Phyllis Heath. She was my inspector on this. She'd worked on the Clearwater and had just took a job with the Nez Perce tribe at Red River on the Nez Perce. So she was my inspector, so I felt comfortable. We've worked together for 8-9 years. And so, you know, she was wanting me to do my clump planning and grade control structures and stuff. And I felt, you know, I have, you know, the dollars are paying, so yeah, let's do it. Let's show them we can do this and do it right. And we did. And she brought out people that she works with from there, and they looked at it, and they're hopefully going to try to change that. But I mean, that's, you know, contracting, the contract itself has to allow to do things right. And you have to pay the contractor for that. I mean, this, you know, and I don't know why the Forest Service thinks the fixed price contract is such a better deal, because if it's money, I think I'll have to thumb my nose at them, because I kept real close track of this contract. My hours spent on that fixed price contract, I'd have been paid less than half of if I'd have been on the Clearwater. I more than doubled my money on that fixed price contract than what I'd have done it for by the hour. So I'm having a hard time swallowing, you know, that these fixed price contracts are the best thing for the government. I don't, they'll have to prove it to me some other way, because, you know, it darn sure didn't pan out that way on this contract. And they told me I was gonna barely break even, that I bid that contract so low that they didn't think I was gonna make it. You know, that I would barely cover my costs. But man, I'll go broke like that anytime. But some of the other things that I deal with are the people I work with. I have been extremely lucky. I mean, the people, Annie Connor, the COR on the Clearwater, I mean, she's probably one of the few, and I hate to give engineers black eyes, but she is one of the few engineers that really cares about water. It seems like, you know, most of the engineers that I deal with, they're trained to build things, construct good things. And when you go in and you start tearing out stuff and you clump plant something, they just think, you know, well, you know, you don't need to do that. Just, you know, you've got X amount of miles, get it wiped out. And that's the wrong philosophy, in my opinion. I mean, take the time. If you're going to do it right. And I think that's, you know, that's why I've been so successful with working with Becca and Phyllis and Annie is you have to care about what you do and try to do the best you can. And that's one thing I want to touch. If any of you people are, you know, putting people out in the field with equipment, don't don't turn anybody out there that doesn't know what they're doing. The inspectors I've worked with good to bad, and the good people that have been out in the field and seen the equipment work and know how it works. It just makes all the difference in the world to the contractor. And you know, and I've always felt really privileged, because from Annie Connor to Becca to Phyllis, we work as a team. It's not contractor, Forest Service, this thing. I mean, it's been a total team effort, and I think that's a lot of the reason we've had the success that we have. I mean, we get into a soupy, sloppy draw, and, you know, I can shut the machine down, get out, we stomp around, wait around in the mud, come to a general consensus of what we want to do, and then we go to work doing it. I mean, it's great. I mean, I couldn't be happier. I have the best office of any of you. So, it's just been a pleasure. I love the work. It's treated me well. You know, I'm definitely not getting rich. I don't ever plan on being rich, but I've raised my family and have a nice home and I'm able to live where I live. You know, that's part of the sacrifice of living in the Clearwater Valley. You don't get rich there. You survive and enjoy, the life that it gives you, and that's all I ask for. And as far as we recreate. 90% of our recreations, of our vacations, are spent on the public land. They always have been, and they probably always will be. Fishing, hunting, whatever. Just going, hanging out for the day. And so, I have a true love for our land. I mean, and it needs to be taken care of. And what we're doing, I'm hoping that, my grandchildren can come to the Lochsaw, and I truly believe it will be better than what I've enjoyed with the work that's going on right now. I mean, they can go up Fishing's Creek and see a salmon spawn. I mean, they can catch a cutthroat out of Lochsaw, and the water's clear, and life's good. I mean, what more could you ask for? So, thanks for tolerating me. And
I know we're anxious to get on and stretch your legs and have some lunch, but we have some time for some questions. Any questions for our panel? Bill?
Any tribes besides the Nez Perce had a vision like that and tried to implement it?
I'm sorry, Bill, you're going to have to...
Have any tribes besides the Nez Perce had a vision like theirs and tried to implement it?
Is there any other tribes in here? I lucked out because there was a couple guys I grew up with, basically, or they grew up with my kids. No, not that I'm aware of. And in fact, I think as far as the partnership agreement with the Forest Service that we're doing, I don't think there's a tribe in the nation that has the program we have, the relationship we have under a treaty that we've used to help, bring this together because of the trust, responsibility, and co-management effort. I doubt if anybody has the same vision, because we're pretty unique in the Clearwater Basin. And of course, the Flatheads here could be doing a lot of the same stuff here with the local forests, and I don't know why they're not, but the same thing could happen right here within the Bitterroot, the Beaverhead, and another forest, the Flathead Forest, and Lolo National Forest. And when we go to these tribal meetings, the one thing we always point out to all the tribes, most of the meetings we go to, there might be 15 tribes represented there. We always tell them the Nez Perce are the noblest of us all. So.
Yeah, I noticed that Bonneville Power Administration, I guess EPA, provided a lot of the funding for the work. I'm interested to know what their interest in that is. Is it reducing, I'm guessing it would be reducing sediment that would, why are they funding?
Bonneville Power's got a legal responsibility because of the dam, so under mitigation, all of the dams that are in the Columbia River has reduced the salmon populations unbelievable. So they're paying us, they're contracting with us to go out there and do the work we're doing to help their mitigation responsibilities.
So it comes under the Endangered Species Act. Their dams are a take of the anadromous species, and they're required to mitigate for that. And we compete for that money, Columbia Basin-wide. They have an average of 139 million that they put into mitigation, and then everyone per year, and everyone and their brother competes for that money in the Columbia Basin. So your project needs to be tied in some way to salmon recovery. So they fund us to improve the habitat that's likely to improve the survival of the salmon, which will offset the take at the dams. And another key thing about Bonneville is that the dollars they put into mitigation are ratepayer dollars, so they're considered private dollars and not federal dollars. And that's why we're able to match, direct cost with the Forest Service. It's a non-federal match, that's right.
Have you looked at, or do you have any ability to deal with the contracting portion of that? Because I know that being a contractor for federal projects, if you do get a bad COR, it's a tough project. And you're talking about, the hourly rate versus the fixed rate. And oftentimes, I think the contracting is probably the worst part of any of these projects.
We have an acronym.
The definition, COR. What is COR?
Contracting officer.
Contracting officer representative.
Thank you.
We've tried to get the two forests to do everything identical, and I don't know, it's like you're dealing with two different cultures. And as Mark pointed out, we don't want to give any black eyes to engineers, but it just happens, and there are certain engineers, and they're set. This one individual is set that fixed contracting is the only way to go, and we can't change that.
I'm imagining that sometimes road decommissioning can be controversial, and I'm wondering if you have a community education and outreach component that goes with your road decommissioning projects?
Actually, I have to give credit to the Clearwater National Forest. They've done a lot of outreach to help pave the way for the level of decommissioning that we've done. Annie Connor, who Mark Agee met, she took our program to Logger Days in Kuski, Idaho, and we invited people out on field trips. And one thing that once you get people out in the field and they can see what you're doing, we come to a lot more common ground. It does take a lot of time and outreach, and you have to have people on the other side that are willing to come out on the field trips and really engage in meaningful dialogue. And so that's key, and we've been fortunate that we've been able to convince people it's worth their time to do that. We also have another advantage, at least on the lock saw, that is shed controversy because so many of these roads were already overgrown. That people weren't using them as roads. They were virtually impassable, and Phyllis can attest to this, by human foot. Phyllis and I spent a lot of time crawling on these roads to survey them, literally. So very thick, overgrown vegetation, so it wasn't anyone's favorite ATV route, or in fact, we see actually human use of the roads increase, thanks to Wildland CPR has a wildlife monitoring program on some of the roads that we've decommissioned. They're looking at how wildlife use changes between decommissioned, open, and just closed roads with a gate. And we actually see more human and wildlife traffic on our decommissioned roads than probably we did before. So those two things, but outreach is key. And the Forest Service really, Annie Connor has really done a great job with that.
Marty, could you perhaps address that social, political component of road restoration?
You bet. Yeah, that reminds me, a few years ago, we did a study looking at a bunch of different forests that had road decommissioning programs to see sort of what made for a successful program and what made for a more controversial program, because road decommissioning is often quite controversial. And that outreach component is definitely one of the key components. And yeah, Annie Connor has done a great job on the Clearwater. Some efforts on the Lolo National Forest have also been really positive because of that early upfront outreach, getting folks out on the ground, those types of efforts. So I definitely think that's one of the keys to having a successful program.
One of the things I really enjoyed hearing here was this talk about how you were able to work together towards a common goal. In my experience, one of the big challenges is between the idea of I'll have contracting or grant administration people say, how are we going to enforce that this agreement is complied with? And I'll say, excuse me, why don't we look at it this way? Why don't we look at it, how are we going to work together to make sure that everybody accomplishes a goal that we can all agree to? But I think one of the big challenges is the history of contracting. Certainly in my agency is more one of this enforcement mentality. And it's one of the advantages if you move into a different kind of, like if you work in grants, agreements, and cooperative agreements, it's a financial instrument that in federal regulation is designed more to have a dialogue about what our common objectives are. And I think that that change of, from a regulatory point of view, saying to being more adaptive, it sounds like in this first example, you guys have moved a lot in a way towards that direction of saying, hey, what do we really all want to accomplish here, which also creates ownership in the outcome instead of, this environment of you will comply, with the elements. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I guess in my mind, yes. So we have an agreement with the Forest Service that's cooperative, that's fundamental to how we share cost, and we share direct cost. And then there's the contractor, the subcontractor, the heavy equipment work. And in my mind, there's a couple of key elements that you want to look for in the contract. First of all, you have to be flexible. You have to be able to come up with a contracting method, and they're out there, that's going to really meet your needs. And like Mark said, restoration is complex. It's not like putting a bridge in. And then you have to provide the people to work with the contractors to make sure you're working together. And so embedded in our contracting method, that's why we're such an advocate for the hourly rate. It removes that kind of, well, Mark, you were supposed to do this, this, and this, so that it changes the entire relationship. We're out there together, we're paid on time, and we have already defined what our goal is, which is to restore the watershed. And to do that, we take the road out. And then how we do that, all of that gets paid in hours. And then there's the value part of the contract. And we've proved time and time again that that is actually a more efficient, higher value to the government than this fixed price, where it becomes like, well, now you have to go back because we said in this little paragraph here. And, I hate contracts like that. Our culvert contracts are like that, and they're really hard to enforce. So flexible, value, and, defining your goals.
That comment actually that you come up with takes us back about 10 years, and a lot of the struggles we've been through, this hasn't been easy. When we come on board, when the tribe come on board, we were asking for a change in the Forest Service and how they do business. It was very difficult for them to accept that. In fact, this year is the first time we got the Forest Service to allow one of our own people to be an inspector for doing roads and culverts. It's been a long time coming. Even though they had their own inspectors, they would allow our people to do the inspector, but we never had the title. So we're finally licensed, and it's been difficult. There's a lot of change going on in terms of the tradition of the Forest Service, but most importantly, in relation to what you're talking about there is what I've seen and that is needed, and it's coming down the road. Earlier discussions today about the fire problems, the lack of budget. All that relates to some of the issues we're dealing with right now in restoration with the Forest Service. Their budgets are going to nothing. So we're doing the best we can to provide more funding, as Becca pointed out. We have these partnership agreements, and under the partnership agreement, we decide you provide these people, you provide this money, so we share that, and it's been working pretty good. As you see, for the one award, though, we have $12 million in the bank, and they only have $5 million. The Forest Service used to have millions and millions for restoration. So we're kind of pulling that together. The one thing I didn't want to do is get into this in a situation where we're doing the administrative work for the Forest Service. But we've always kind of had it on the back burner. The first 10 years of our program, we lucked out and didn't have to go there. If these budgets continue to drop, we're going to have to take over some of the administrative activities. And that might even be engineers. I mean, we have our own engineers that work for us. So it's just a matter of time. If their budgets keep dropping, we're going to be going for more money to support that program.
Maybe a couple more questions here.
Just real quick, in the
previous panel, they talked about the environmental laws and how that could be an hindrance to doing restoration work. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how NEPA has or has not affected your work. And I think that's tiered to the administrative stuff as well that you just mentioned directly.
You know, I could, in relation to timber sales, we kind of got cut out of some projects because the tribe, we did sue in one of the projects, and we won, but we couldn't get the restoration activities within that project pulled out of there separate in NEPA. We were told they can't separate that. They got to do it all as one package. So the restoration work didn't continue. Since then, we've settled and compromised everything out. So we get to go in there and start doing this work. I'm going to let Rebecca jump in there because she's working closer technically to a lot of the ESA and the NEPA problems that we're aware of.
This is almost a different answer for every forest. Most of my experience is on the Clearwater, and it depends on how they're willing to use the tool of NEPA to approach restoration. And as Ira said, it becomes really confounding when you make restoration a part of a timber sale. The two are often in conflict, and those tend to end up in court. I actually think the foresters would honestly be doing themselves a great favor to make a timber sale, and put the NEPA through for that, because that's what it is. It's a timber sale, and that's fine. You know, so you analyze the impacts of that, and then you have restoration, and has a whole different set of significant impacts and purposes. And when the two aren't married, we're really lucky. The Clearwater has been an advocate for using every tool they have in their basket. And one of those tools is a categorical exclusion. And we've worked really hard with the Department of Environmental Quality and EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and NOAA Fisheries to inform them about the kinds of restoration that we do. So we have a relationship there. So when we put through a categorical exclusion, we don't get a lot of questions or concerns from one of the regulatory agencies. So NEPA on the Clearwater for restoration, when it's separated, just for road-a-blit or just for a culvert replacement, it's a breeze. It's nothing. Our biggest backlog is the fact that the Clearwater is losing people hand over fist that they're not replacing. They're losing their ologist. And what Ira said, you know, they only have like one or two people now that can help plan a project. And that's where our backlog is. We've got money. How many programs can say that? We don't have the people on the Forest Service end to help us plan and prioritize the projects. That's what we're losing. So NEPA itself has not been a barrier to us.
Thank you very much. Let's, I think it's time maybe for a little waistline restoration with lunch. Lunch is going to be served out in the courtyard out here in the foyer, atrium, whatever we're calling that structure. So got some time for lunch. We have a little speech at lunch, and then the program will continue after. Thank you.